Yeah, so I'll try not to bring it back to chickens every time, because I come from a farming background and we reared chickens. We've always had chickens in my life, so my earliest memory is chickens, the smell of chickens and collecting eggs for the table. But thank you for coming to this. This is Perspectives on Agriculture. It is a really wonderful panel, a really, really interesting and topical subject. Today is Food and Agriculture Day. So the first person welcome to the stage is Sheila. And then she's from the Environmental Health and Justice Programme Manager from Poetry for the Planet. So inspiring.
Yes. Some of you heard me a little bit ago.
That's brilliant. We're going to hear from Sheila. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Yeah, so I'm Sheila Barefoot. I am, as it says on there, an Environmental Health and Justice Program Manager for Poetry for Planet. My educational background is in environmental health science from Hopkins and genetics and plant biology for my undergrad at Berkeley. So I like to fuse science and creative endeavors, and also I'm Chiricahua Apache, so of course bringing in an indigenous perspective in spaces where we are vastly outnumbered by oil executives and where our knowledges and sciences tend to be either tokenized or completely disregarded.
Brilliant, thank you. And now following that we have Nika, the founder of Youth Climate Save Canada. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So, hi everybody, my name is Nika. Youth Climate Save Canada is a youth-run nonprofit in Canada focused on amplifying youth voices on sustainable food systems as a climate solution. So we focus on policy advocacy on food waste, plant-based foods, as well as agroecological farming practices. So we basically try to shift the food system from a policy level, but also educating fellow youth in Canada about problems like food waste, transitioning to more plant-based foods, etc. And I've been running this organization for 1 year full-time. Before that, I was working in the Canadian government on environmental regulations. So my background is in government policy, so I bring that policy perspective into my work in food systems. And in addition to Youth Climate Save, I'm also a storyteller and content creator on social media. So I like to educate my audience, which is fellow youth mostly from Canada, on how they can make more sustainable choices.
Brilliant, thank you, thank you. And now, last but not least, is Casper, and he's from Kew. And when he comes on stage, say Kew is a really great place. It's the only place I've visited, but it's also my children's favourite place to go when we've got a bit of time at the weekend. So could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Casper Chater. I'm a crop scientist, a plant scientist at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew in London, in the UK. My focus is essentially on legume crops, beans, pulses, how we can really put them at the centre of both climate mitigation and climate adaptation and food system, food security and resilience.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So yes, and this is a conversation. So it's going to hopefully you'll be talking to each other very freely, ask each other questions, but also it's a conversation with you. So if you have any questions or interjections, please just jump in. We don't want it to be a dull panel discussion where you've got me, a middle-aged white male, trying to ask staid questions that we've seen a million times before. And the other thing before I do ask one question is, this is a really exciting panel for me because it's about, a lot of it's about youth. And I have a 10-year-old whose birthday it is today. So she's absolutely good.
Happy birthday.
I will tell her that. I've sung happy birthday to her about 20 minutes ago over there, but nobody noticed. I'm quite relieved about that. So I feel I've got a stake in the next generations, my 10-year-old and my 8-year-old, who are also very proud that this is happening and that they love this sort of conversation. But just on a positive note, what is your vision for a future food system? How would you like to see it?
Oh man.
Yeah.
Okay, just a simple question, how I'm going to re-envision the entire industrial food system that is currently capitalist and exploitative. So the opposite of that, basically. One of the things that I think we've been really removed from in our food system, in part because we're not growing our food anymore, is we forget about food as a living entity. We don't experience being around crops that are growing. We don't interact with animals that we eat. And there's a huge, huge amount of disrespect that that distance provides. I know that some people see this as an advancement. And while sure, this might be somewhat labor saving, I see it as a regression actually, because we've lost so much of our consciousness that we previously had about being in touch with the land that nourishes us and nourishing the land back itself.
Nikki?
Beautiful. Healthy, right? Going back to food as medicine, food as nourishment for our bodies, food that really heals us and provides us with nutrients. Regenerative, meaning that the way that we farm is regenerating the soils again. It's not just taking from the land, but it's giving back to the land. So crops that have deep roots that are preserving the water, helping the soil. More local, so a vision where every person, even in a big city, will have access to a community garden or a vertical garden where they can actually directly get their food from. And really fair to the farmers, so meaning that the farmers are getting a living wage, they're getting financial support and compensation for their food, but at the same time affordable to everybody so that it's accessible, and healthy, nutritious, abundant food is accessible everywhere. And on that vision also, that conferences like this serve us food in a way that nourishes us and is really not wasteful. So right now we have so much food waste in the world, we have so much packaging and plastic also use. And it'd be great if really those ethics and values of the vision of food would come into our daily actions, including being at conferences, including our daily lives. And that's why I wanted to really talk about the vision, because we often talk about the solutions and we get really in the details of all the technical solutions, but it's like, where are we going? Like, what's the big picture of where we're going? And there's disagreement on the path to get there, but I think we agree on the vision. So I would say even a vegan and a livestock farmer will agree that everyone in the world should have food, and that we should be healthy and we should be nourished and our families should be supported. And I think in the world of food systems and food, we get very divided into our own boxes. I think this is the solution. No, I think this is the solution. And we fight each other, but at the end of the day, we have a shared values of healthy, sustainable, nourishing, regenerative food. So thanks for asking that question.
I agree with everything that the speakers have said, and I'd also like to add that the food systems that I would like to see come out of what there currently is will be diversified both from the farmer perspective of how they manage the soil for the biggest positive impact to future soil health and food health, food quality that is, and then diversified for those who eat, right? All of us who put stuff on the plate, who choose what to buy in the market, in the supermarket, or choose what to grow in our own land if we're fortunate enough to have it. So that's essentially, diversification for planetary health and human health.
Fantastic. I mean, because a lot of that strikes, true with me, and sort of it does raise some of the questions I've had, because some of the things you were saying, like I was yesterday, went to 2 separate panels, one after each other, and they were both about methane and livestock. The first panel was just dominated by cattle farmers, and all the questions were basically saying cows are the answer, you need regenerative grazing. The people who say you need to go plant-based are wrong, they don't understand science, you've got to have more cows to help feed the global hungry, and it was all really, really convincing. The next panel was run by ProVeg International, and had almost exactly the same questions. But all the answers were like, you need to go plant-based, we need to transition away from livestock, you're not going to feed the planet during livestock. So it's quite confusing if you're a layperson, because you're going, same questions, but you're not talking to each other. So how do you think we can create an environment where we have, what did someone call it? Radical collaboration, where we can try to come up with some of the solutions instead of just always being,
This is such a spicy question.
Yes.
And I came to COP last year, so like full transparency, I'm on the vegan side.
Same.
But I came to COP last year and I said, I'm going to go and find the greenwashing, and I'm going to go in all the livestock people and raise my hand and ask a question. But then when I actually got into the room, and I actually sat in the room with them, and I really listened to them, I realized we have the same values, and that's why I said that in the beginning. We all want to feed the world. We all want our soils to be healthy. We all want Earth to thrive. You know, the livestock people don't want deforestation. They don't want the harms of animal agriculture. They don't want the sicknesses that surround the factory farms. They want to improve these things, I think, genuinely in their heart, hopefully. But how do we do it, right? How do we do it? Because many of them are not wanting to come to the vegans pavilion. And then also a lot of the vegans are like, there's no way I'll go there. And I think that we've become so ideological. But there's a few of us, I would say there's about 10 people that will go to both and listen and collaborate. But the way that we do that actually is, I think, we need a representative of each side, and then we need to create a dialogue space and really to form solutions. That's what's really important. But in order to create that dialogue space, we need to feel safe going into these spaces, and we need to be courageous to get out of our own box and put away our own beliefs in the name of collaboration and commitment. Because honestly, I really admire the way that the livestock sector has power. They're connected with Walmart, they're connected with Nestle, they're connected with all of the agriculture ministers. They have their fingers in everything, which means that if I'm able to form a strong, positive relationship with that person as a friend and as someone with some common values, then I will therefore also gain power, you know? So it's kind of actually strategic for us to put away our differences and come to the table, but it's kind of hard to convince people to do this. I think youth are a solution. So to really answer your question, I think young people are more open-minded and are a bit more less set in their ways, so they're able to kind of bridge these divides. So I would actually say the solution is to have more support for youth to enter the different spaces and connect and learn.
Anyone else?
There are many regions around the world, many communities that can't rely on growing vegetables, right? We are very privileged to be able to choose our diets a lot of the time. So if we have to face the truth that we can't grow where we live, and we have to have livestock to be able to get those calories and nutrition, that's a given, right? But at the same time, I want to see everywhere a kind of circular economy thinking where we get to a point where whether it's livestock, whether it's plant-based, it's all for minimal energy usage and maximal kind of long-term environmental positive impact.
So, I'm also one on the vegan side. However, I rarely talk about it. I try to like kind of be a covert vegan in a way, just because there's so much, frankly, obnoxiousness that I've seen from a lot of very strong vegan advocates. I went to undergrad in Berkeley. If you want to find obnoxious vegans, that's like the capital. But despite that, I think that there's still a possibility of discussing solutions together, but one thing that I think we need to take into account, yes, like the agricultural sector, especially the animal agriculture sector, has a lot of power, and some of them may indeed wish for there to be more humane conditions, but they need to want that over profits. It doesn't matter if you want it if you don't want it badly enough. And of course, there's the whole global system, but I'm thinking a little bit differently in terms of who are we considering as the farmers and the stakeholders. Are we talking about the people who are owning the farms and in the negotiating rooms and trying to pass agricultural rules and food aid rules? Are we talking about the people at the top who are actually negotiating those connections with Walmart and all these other agribusinesses? Or are we talking about the people who are, milking the cows and picking the fruits and vegetables, sucking down all of the organophosphates and other pesticides, being exposed to all the viruses and other types of rapidly mutating bacteria that are in the, caged animal feeding operations in CAFOs? Are we talking about them? And I know that they are in positions of much less power and at a position of greater risk. So I think that we need to bring the people who have the most risk and who are putting the most on the line in order to feed the world into the conversation, because I can guarantee that they definitely want more humane conditions for animals and for crop picking, because more humane conditions for that means more humane conditions for them. We have decided to invisibilize an entire sector of people and decide that they are not worth as much as we are in order to sustain our food system. Our entire current industrial agricultural system is built on the devaluation of land and then built on the devaluation of people who are feeding us. And I think we have to reconcile that very ugly and inconvenient truth if we're going to get solutions. So it's not just, kind of people at the top people with certain privileges who might be vegan and certain people with certain privileges who might be livestock farmers. I think we really need to bring everyone into this discussion and value their opinions equally.
Oh, wow.
I agree with what you both said. Something that is said often in the Blue Zone is there's no one size fits all, and the solutions that apply for a farmer in India who has 2 dairy cows is very different than a farmer in Arkansas that has 500. And nevertheless, both of those farmers should be at COP and should be discussing solutions. And in addition to that, I think it's also not just cows. We focus on cows a lot because of methane. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, but I think also where's the chicken farmers and where's the aquaculture? Aquaculture gets very forgotten about in this conversation, but yeah, the whole food system. And I would say what you said about profits is really important and interesting. A lot of the agribusinesses are looking for ways to get incentives actually from government to go straight back to the farmers. So I've become a bit more open-minded on that perspective. I used to think, well, they already have the money, why don't they just do more? But then I learned more about agribusiness and that it is a business and there's costs and all these things, and there needs to be like the technical support to get the farmers to really change their behavior. So, yeah.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there as well. But yeah, really, really, because something I've noticed on the discussions the last few days is the topic of human rights has been missing from almost every single discussion I've heard, and it's been gnawing at me as why is that not part of it? We're talking about joined up solutions, nature and climate solutions, and we're still not talking about human rights, child rights, labour rights, land rights, women's rights. It's just seems to be absent at the moment.
Yeah. I'll let you go.
Well, I was thinking on that note, this comes back to global supply chains and traceability for those human rights questions. Where do we source our cocoa, coffee, soybeans, not just for human rights, but also for deforestation? So that needs to change, right? And people are doing things in that space to improve transparency in those supply chains for human livelihoods at the end of the day.
Yeah, good. can I quickly ask, because you could touched on a little bit by saying sort of vegan, plant-based, sort of, I know you work on legumes, and I'm really interested about the fact I keep hearing protein thrown around, and I keep hearing alternate protein, which personally is a term I hate, don't really understand what the hell it means, because it's all protein. It's not alternative, it's protein. But I was thinking about this, is protein the wrong framing for this whole discussion we're having? Because particularly amongst the global middle classes, no one is protein deficient. And globally, we produce far too much protein. So should we try and reframe the discussion maybe into something else?
That's a fascinating question. I actually really like this in terms of how we package it and talk about food in our diets, because what we eat is so very personal. And so I actually used to work in between undergrad and grad school as a diabetes-focused health educator at the Native American Health Center in San Francisco. So I did nutritional consultations, almost daily for a couple years. And with that, you learn how much internalized shame and judgment people have about their diets if they have any kind of particular health issue that has been unjustly highly stigmatized, like diabetes or heart disease, or if they're a larger person. And that means that the conversation needs to have a lot of sensitivity and a lot of lack of judgment. So I think sometimes when we talk about like, oh, you need more protein, you need more this, you need more that, you need to be healthier, you need to eat this way, that triggers a lot of shame and judgment feelings from people, and they shut down and are no longer receptive to it. So I think that we need to frame this not so much in terms of you're deficient in this and you need to have that. I think we need to frame it as expanding options for people, so that way they have more choice and more control over their own diets. I think we need to frame it as open conversations for people to talk and ask questions and not feel like they're dumb or something because they don't know the answer to it or they don't know all the amino acids or whatever. You really need to meet people where they're at. So this is a long-winded answer, but yes, I think that turning it away from framing it on just protein and then framing it more in terms of this is a different way to eat. These are simply different options might be a little bit more helpful, because I have seen that type of framing can sometimes get people to shut down. Obviously not everyone, it's not one size fits all, but we need to diversify our messaging at the very least.
Diversifying, yeah. So alternative proteins, usually people think of pulses, beans. That is just the tip of their power, right? And by framing it in protein alone, we're missing the really big picture of that power of legumes. Fiber is not spoken about, yet that's probably far more important than the amount of protein in pretty much everybody's diet. And no, I don't think anyone is eating enough of it. But again, it goes back to, we shouldn't shame ourselves for not eating enough fiber. We should just diversify our diets and get more of this and more of that, and less reliant on essentially just sugar, which is your carbs.
Well said. So I've heard the industry call it complementary proteins, because when you use the word complementary, then it takes away the phrasing of removing meat and dairy. They're saying it's complementary. So maybe you like that term better. But I actually don't think we'll get to a conversation on moving beyond protein at COP. I think there will probably be other conferences or venues, maybe the World Food Forum, where we can actually talk more about the connection between nutrition, climate, and all aspects of that. There's so much we're not talking about because we're taking a very myopic look of we need to expand meat and dairy in order to feed the global south where they're not getting enough protein and calcium and nutrients. And that's all we're focusing on. But if we really focus on fiber and the whole spectrum, the conversation will move a bit away from methane and the promotion of animal agriculture, which I don't think the industry wants to happen at COP. So therefore, I don't think we'll get to that conversation. But in an ideal world, I think that there's so much we need to talk about beyond just the malnutrition of the global south, which is really unfair framing and a very broad stroke to paint the entire global south as malnourished, which is often done, unfortunately, in the name of promoting the growth of industrial agriculture and sustainable intensification. I think we need to move beyond that and really look at nutrition as a whole, and also obesity, because obesity is the other side of the coin, right, of malnourishment. There's obesity, there's emotional eating, there's so many causes as to why we eat and why our system is broken. There's an unequal access to food, food deserts in the world, lack of affordability of food. There's so many issues, but I don't think we'll get there at COP, unfortunately, because it doesn't really fit neatly into the schedule of what people want to promote about themselves. So I don't think we'll get there, but I think that it's really important, and I think maybe we'll find other forums and ways to have those conversations.
Yeah.
That triggered some thoughts on my part. So I love what you mentioned about how we're taking a very myopic view and that we're missing the holistic part of all of this. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about climate change, we're focusing so heavily on emissions reduction, we forget some of these other things that we need to worry about with environmental destruction, like toxics. And I started thinking of that in part because you mentioned obesity. My master's capstone was on indigenous exposure to environmental obesogens. So the issue of obesity is not just what we're eating, how much we're exercising, and all these other social factors. Some of it has to do with, your traditional food systems being poisoned with organotins that bioaccumulate in the fish that you're eating, or PCBs that bioaccumulate in the fish that you're eating, that can cause your body to have a lower rates of fat oxidation and burn muscle instead of fat, or to be more likely to have a lower REE, or the one that's most troubling with organotins. And the organotins, and like tributyltin in particular, were kind of like the OG obesogen that was discovered in 2009 or 2008 rather at UC Irvine. This is a young field. This field is barely old. Is this field old enough to drink? This field isn't even old enough to drink yet. So it's young. But in any case, the scary one with that one is they observed in mice that exposure to tributyltin caused the production of adipose tissue at the expense of bone. So I think that it's moving beyond sort of the aesthetic and moralized, stigmatized parts of it, and realizing no, this is bad because this is a trade-off that's weakening your bone density and causing adipose tissue to grow, especially in places where it really shouldn't be growing, in your liver, and replacing hepatocytes. So that can cause liver dysfunction and make people more prone to fatty liver disease. Again, going back to the myopic view, I think that there's actually a lot of the rhetoric that we see in the diet industry, diet culture, that gets replicated in climate change. I could go on for hours about this, but I won't. So I'll give you just a quick snapshot. In a Western perspective, and I've talked about this a lot, nature is hyper-feminized in a very negative way. Nature is seen as something to be extracted, it's seen as something to be subservient, it's seen as something to mold into the shape that we want, quite literally. And so I see a lot of these myopic discussions on climate change as almost essentially being we just need to put the earth on a diet so that way she meets our needs and that we don't have to do anything else and change our behavior or try and focus on any of these other issues. I mean, I see nuclear energy as basically the equivalent of artificial sugars. It's like the Splenda. It's like the Splenda, down to the fact that it'll give you cancer. It's like the Splenda of the energy sector. And we're looking at it because we're just looking for a short, quick-term fix to make it what we want, and we're not taking into account the holistic perspective, and we're not taking into account all these other things that hurt us. It's like the keto diet, cut carbs, and then that messes up your gut microbiome. Mine the earth for transitional minerals, and then don't care about the sacred sites it destroys, don't care about all of the obesogens it's leaking into the water, I'll use endocrine disruptors specifically because it's very broad, there's 400 different compounds, so I don't want to misspeak by accident. But in any case, the point is we're focusing on a myopic level because we have this desire to bend the earth to our will, bend the food systems to our will, and we are unwilling to change our own behaviors.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And if you look at traditional agricultural systems, A lot of the time, the reason they do it that way is because it works. It's efficient. For example, in North America, in Mexico and southern United States, you've got the Three Sisters agriculture, the milpa system. Your beans are central to that. They are providing that organic matter, organic carbon into the soil and fixing nitrogen from the air that other plants can't reach and giving it to that system for the protein, right? For the nitrogen protein is packed with nitrogen. So without that combination, it just won't work. And what we're finding with monoculture is obviously it doesn't work unless you put in those huge inputs. And right now, our reliance on synthetic fertilizer, organic nitrogen from the oil industry essentially, we can't do it. So we've got to go to these other methods if it's going to be sustaining and nutritious for the long term.
That's brilliant. We will be losing Nikki in a few minutes' time. So does anyone in the audience have questions, points they want to raise? It's a great opportunity with this fantastic panel. Don't be shy. No? Yes, please. Yes. Do we have a microphone? I think there's. Oh, I think she's just coming.
The microphone's like for the recording, so
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Speaking about food and food production, I think it's very big attention given to gases, but so little attention given to earth contamination with all this lead and all that metals and everything. So what do you think of how to deal with that? Thank you.
Yeah, there definitely needs to be a stronger shift in focus on contamination. Speaking from a US centric perspective, one of the things that would be really helpful is if the US government recognized tribal sovereignty, for one, and would actually give adequate resources to fund cleanups. There are over 500 open uranium mines on the Navajo Nation. 34% of Superfund sites are located on native land. Our tribal nations don't have the same type of consultation requirements by the EPA if the EPA does not think that it impacts our land, and that completely ignores sacred sites, that ignores other territory that may be disputed, despite the fact that the whole country is ours. But bottom line, the continued contamination and that impacts all of us very, very negatively is in part fueled by environmental racism that continues to use our lands and our bodies as sacrifice zones because that's easy and convenient. And we definitely will bear the brunt of it, but it is something that negatively impacts everyone.
My solution on this is, so I used to work in the Canadian government. I was a policy analyst on a coal mining effluent regulation. Effluent is the water that runs off of the mine. So in the water, there was selenium and there was toxic metals. So basically the regulation was putting a limit on what the content of the metal should be. And the solution is that we as citizens and ideally as supporters of nonprofits, we should actually be emailing the government, we should be writing letters to the government. Even when we're interacting with the government at COP, we should really be letting them know our concerns, because at the same time as we are sharing our concerns, the industry is asking for exceptions and the industry is asking to continue to be allowed to pollute because they will say it's too expensive to clean it up, unfortunately. And unfortunately, what I've seen from industry at COP, broad industry, is that they're looking for incentives and financial benefit to do something. So if that is not present, they're not going to act. So the other side of the carrot is the stick, so we need regulations. But regulations will only happen when government sees that there's a lot of demand from public and there's its own reputation is at risk. So in the case of Canada, Canada doesn't want to be seen as a polluted, dirty place. I'm sure the US also would feel this way. So if we are painting them in that light, they're going to want to fix things. This is going to get very difficult because a lot of our countries are having elections, and as a result of these elections, the government is shifting to one that even further does not prioritize pollution. So what we need to do is we need to continue to lobby. I think we can also even lobby industry to let them know how much this affects us, because at the end of the day, industry people are also human beings, and maybe we can appeal to their inherent humanness beyond their focus on profit. So I think that the solution is regulation, and the solution is also lobbying of industry and government.
I think it's really important to look at history and so I'm from the UK, I live in Sheffield, which is a massive industrial city. It was at the heart of the Industrial Revolution and the British Empire. Production of steel, production of weapons, and to some extent it still does, but it's a post-industrial city where the houses are built on old slag heaps. Basically, the metals, the heavy metals, have polluted our soils. And we also grow plants in the city. There's a big re-greening program. We have allotments in the UK where households can go out and grow their own vegetables and put it on their plate. Obviously, they eat it. So it's really important that we're not eating heavy metals every day when we're trying to do something, do the right thing and diversify our diets and eat locally. And there's been a lot of research done by the University of Sheffield and others showing that even though we've got very high levels of cadmium, lead, etc., in those soils, actually the amount that reaches the fruit of the plant or the vegetable, it depends on the species, depends on the crop, but sometimes or a lot of the time, it's at those levels that are much lower than will cause, than a high risk. But we had the Clean Air Act in the UK in 1957, right? We banned lead in petrol, decades ago in the UK. That's different for different countries. So there's still a lot of environmental pollution that's going on that's having devastating impacts to local communities. And we need to draw on lessons from the past to address those.
Yeah. I just want to quickly add...
What time is it? Sorry.
It is 10
There's
to.
no clocks. Okay, I do have to go,
I'll be keeping an eye on this.
unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Nikki.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Yeah. But I'm just going to quickly add to that, because in the UK context as well, and I did my master's on water pollution and catchment-based river catchment management approaches. And in England, there's a massive thing going on at the moment we've got the most polluted rivers in Europe since we left the EU. And what we've found is the pollution's caused by three reasons. One, it's water companies just ignoring the regulations, and they're just pumping sewage straight into the rivers, into some amazing places like the River Wye, which used to be one of the most biodiverse, rich freshwater systems in Europe. Now it's categorised as dead. And their argument, and they also give record profits to shareholders, but their argument is they now don't have to share their data because it's not in the public interest. The other causes of water pollution in the UK are chicken farms and pig farms. Again, there's no limit to how many you can have, so they punch loads and loads of poo into the rivers, and that kills them. And the final cause of it is farming, agriculture, particularly the nitrates from industrial agriculture being washed off the soil into the rivers, causing algae blooms, which means they're poisonous. And the joint problem of all of this is there's no requirement for transparency. And we've found that when you report on things like water pollution, people get really angry and demand change, and suddenly governments start creating change. So I think another part of this is going to be transparency. So it's really important. When we know as citizens, we have then the power to push for change. Any other questions from the audience? And two over here. Who's got the microphone? There was a microphone going around.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
It's on, is it?
Yeah.
There may well be others in the room, but I work in the meat industry, and I came along today to listen to what was being said because I think it's of interest to the meat sector. Just to give you a background, I'm the sustainability manager for the British Meat Processors Association. So it's a bit of an odd job title, as a lot of people look at me and think, really, how do you do that? Just to give you an idea of scale, and I won't go on for too long, but the UK meat industry has a revenue of 12 billion, so a contribution to the economy of 12 billion, 29,000 employees and 397 businesses that operate either running abattoirs or cutting and packing meat for supermarkets. I won't go into, there's so many things I'd like to talk about with the panel, and shame everyone's not here. But, I think I'm here because I think it's important that there is a moderate dialogue about the way forward. I think the FAO very recently have published reports that say that livestock are part of the problem and part of the solution. There's far too much dialogue and narrative around all meat when different species have different impacts. There's lots of work being done in the meat sector to reduce their emissions. The EU deforestation regulation I've been very closely involved with from a UK perspective, and actually we embrace that and want it to be effective because it means that over time the UK meat industry can say, we don't have a problem with deforestation. We are compliant with the EU deforestation regulation. And that's a really good story for the meat industry. But I think there's a lot of, like I said, polarization in the dialogue. And I think I welcome the opportunity to have some more moderate conversations about how we can feed the population of the planet with a healthy and nourishing diet that includes meat and dairy. In moderation.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I think we'd all agree with that. At least not going to speak for everyone. If that's wrong. I would agree with that quite comfortably, because I do think there's a role for varied diets, and it's also, from my perspective, there's really important to recognise cultural acceptability. Like in some cultures, people are vegan and they choose not to, and that's absolutely fine and shouldn't be rejected. In other cultures, it's really important. Meat is a really significant part of it. And one thing we've found with Rainforest Alliance, we represent 7.5 million smallholder farmers and forest communities in the tropical region. And it keeps coming back to that, we don't engage on the livestock debate because most of our farmers would welcome the opportunity to rear livestock on their farms and then have benefits from them, whether it's milk, eggs, meat, or even using the manure on their farms to fertilise the soil. So yeah, I agree. For me, a nuanced debate is needed. Anybody else or other questions? One at the back, please.
First of all, thank you for the discussion. And the question, actually, we discussed the fertilizer sides and some other sides and benefits of agriculture, but I'm mainly interested in what are the perspectives in terms of use of the pesticides. Because it's also affecting environmentally, and day by day the companies improving the quality of the pesticides. So, and as far as we improve the quality, so we also improve our impact to the climate. So what's your approach and what's the perspectives on this?
I love it when people ask a question that I've prepped for. So in one of my many hats, I'm part of an organization called Coming Clean, and we're working on a pesticide mapping project in the Climate, Food, Agriculture, and Chemicals Working Group, CFAC. So the link between climate change and the fossil fuel industry and agriculture, in particular in the form of pesticides, is very overlooked. For the majority of pesticides, and I'll use glyphosate as one example, glyphosate, for Roundup, for all those Roundup ready crops, thank you Monsanto, but it takes to produce 1 kilogram of glyphosate. The inputs needed for that are 31.2 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. And by CO2 equivalent, I mean it's been made into CO2, I'm sorry, not made into. We're measuring it as CO2 as kind of like a baseline, but that does include other chemicals. It's just easier to be like 31.2 kilograms of CO2 equivalent versus like 10 of methane and like 5 of sulfur and stuff like that. But in any case, so yes, and then in the US last year, 1 billion pounds, or approximately 455 million kilograms for the rest of the world, of pesticide was used. That is a huge and insane CO2 output. 99% of synthetic chemicals are derived from petroleum hydrocarbons. So the fossil fuel industry and the chemical industry are one in the same. And the way we are currently doing industrial agriculture and our over-reliance on pesticides is not only giving farm workers, birth defects and other awful forms of and other human rights abuses, but it is directly fueling the fossil fuel industry and contributing to the climate crisis. We're only a couple of weeks away from the 40th anniversary of the Bhopal disaster in India, which was a pesticide chemical plant owned by a US company. 500,000 people were exposed to methyl isocyanate, a pesticide. And to this day, there are still people suffering horrible chronic health conditions, children being born with birth defects, all kinds of horrible things, because we wanted to have a slightly more convenient and cost-effective pesticide because our entire priorities are wrong and we're focusing on maximizing production of the most profitable crops versus diversifying things and having crops that might not necessarily be currently as marketable, but are better suited for the environment that they need to be growing in, and having a more diverse food system instead of just monocropping, which contributes to the overuse of pesticides. So yes, pesticides, terrible.
Any thoughts on that?
All farming systems have attempted to maximize yield, and you don't want to come back to your crop the next day to see it completely devastated, whether that's someone growing for their family or whether it's growing for profit. Pesticides, it's a big catch-all term for many, many different approaches. There are scales at which you can have animals that eat other animals as a form of pesticide. That doesn't really work when you're using pesticides that kill all animals. And then the organic sector has also something that they can try and shy away from, which is that there are approved pesticides in organics that do quite a lot of harm. Copper sulfate being one of them. So we really need to think of it holistically and about harm reduction every step of the way. And that means reduction of use of pesticides through changing management practices, land management, planting, choices, what do we grow where and why, because a very high percentage of the crops we grow around the planet are in the wrong place at the wrong time, but we want to maximize yield out of that. So, that's possibly not the best place we're starting from. But I think that pesticides as an option for farmers have to be there, but highly regulated, highly educated, right? Because I'm a user of products that I buy in a shop as a consumer, and I could be putting them on my plants badly, and I think it's minimal impact because I'm just growing in the house, right? So there are lots of things that we need to know about what we use, and a lot of it is kind of ignored, hidden, not very transparent.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Really good answers. Could everyone join me in saying thank you very much to Sheila and Casper. For me, that was really interesting. Could have done this all day, but I've been told to. That's it, we're finishing. So thank you very much for coming. It has been great for you to be here. Great conversation, and thank you again. It's been good.
Cheers.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Sure.